Hey guys, hope y'all are doing well. Welcome back. I don't know whether this is still January for you guys or you're tuning in to get a quick refresher for your AP exam, but I'm glad to have you here. So I'm still on winter break recording this. That's kind of why I look so rough right now. Please don't judge. But we are going to continue on with our imperialism lessons today. So the last two classes we've done some term definitions. We talked about imperialism, social Darwinism, civilizing mission. Our next lesson, we talked about the Sepoy Rebellion and how the British got themselves involved in India. And today we're going to build upon all these lessons. We're actually going to talk about the three sort of newish empires. We've already talked about Russia and Japan, but today we'll look at the American example of imperialism, okay? And College Board really wants me to teach you guys Russia, Japan, and America kind of all together. So I want you guys to be thinking about the imperialism of these three major empires kind of in conjunction with each other, okay? So this map in front of you, we'll probably take a look at these maps in the future, just because imperialism is such an important topic in AP world, but I think this does help to give you an example of what the late period 3 looks like. So kind of leading up to 1900, these major empires and these lands that they've conquered. So as I said, we've talked about the British Empire so far, this little tiny island right here, and all of these like peach salmon colored lands, part of that British Empire, right? So the sun never sets on the British Empire. So as I said, guys, we're going to talk about Japan. So this little brown stuff here, the Japanese Empire will grow rather quickly. We're also going to look at the Russian Empire just a little bit today. Russia kind of starts with this land and slowly sort of becomes a much bigger empire, okay? But we're going to spend a lot more time today talking about America. And so we'll kind of look at America now. You see this big, beautiful blue land right here. And America has not always looked like that. All right, we've already talked about the 13 colonies. We talked about the American Revolution. And today we're going to talk about how America expands and how it grows and how that fits in with this notion of imperialism, okay? So, all right. Again, guys, we are still in period 3. Ignore the date right there. I don't know why it says 1450 to 1750. It is 1750 to 1900. I got to pay attention a little more when I make these PowerPoints. But we are in Unit 6. We are talking about the consequences of industrialization. So as I've said to you guys, the consequences of industrialization, well, there's a lot of them, but kind of the big overarching theme is imperialism, okay? As a quick reminder, guys, you should be working on your period 3 review guides. So go on to Canvas, go on to Files, go on to Review Guides. All right, this will be due when you take your period 3 test. It will also help you study for the exam that we will take very soon. So let's talk about global empires, guys. And again, just to reiterate, College Board wants me to discuss Russia, Japan, and the USA all in conjunction with each other. So you might see some questions about these 3 major empires. The big thing is that all 3 of them are kind of new empires. All right, we've talked about Britain before. We've talked about France before. You've heard me talk about Spain and Portugal. You haven't really heard me talk that much about the empires of Japan, Russia, and the US. And that's what we're gonna change the narrative about that today, okay? So a couple memes to start for you. I like this one. One of my students last year sent this to me recently. This is a good one too. All right. Okay, guys, so to start our lecture, I need you guys to write this down. Well, I need you to write everything that's on my PowerPoint. That's how this works. As we said, guys, in period 3, there's going to be 6 major global empires, okay? Britain and France, those are carryovers from period 2. We talked about how Germany consolidated into one major empire, all right? But on top of that, the US, Japan, and Russia. So these 6 major empires, okay, we said Britain, France, Germany, and the US had private industrialization, and we talked about how Japan and Russia had state-sponsored industrialization, okay? Now let's talk about what industrialization does to these countries and how they become global empires. Now, one thing you might notice, though, is we haven't really talked that much about Portugal and Spain. Okay, they were huge characters in period two. Every time we talk about empires and sugar and slavery and the transatlantic slave trade and trading posts and all that stuff, we always seem to have talked about Spain and Portugal, right? But they aren't really in this global empire, fraternity anymore. And that is because they never really industrialize. Okay, there's not a major push for private industrialization, and the governments in Spain and Portugal never do their own versions of state-sponsored industrialization. Okay, and the key thing is, guys, if you are not one of those 6 powerhouses, if you are not taking over places, you're likely going to be taken over by those places. Okay, so as I said, we're going to be talking about 3 of the new empires today. All right, and I think this political cartoon gives us an example of what they are. You guys probably don't recognize him, but that is Teddy Roosevelt, is an American president, and he is doctoring a peace between Russia and Japan after the Russo-Japanese War, in which the Japanese smoked the Russians. Okay, these 3 right here, these 3 countries, very, very important in the imperialism game. Okay, so I'm going to ask you guys not to write this down, but I do feel like I need to give you a disclaimer. We haven't talked a whole heck of a lot about the United States in this class, and that's going to change. All right, America is going to become probably one of our main protagonists, especially in period 4, especially after World War I and World War II. But I need you guys to understand that this early American history isn't really all cupcakes and rainbows, okay? Yeah, we talked about the American Revolution, and I know a lot of you were, yes, all right? And when we talked about capitalism, and I know a lot of you guys were excited, pro-capitalist Americans. But I need you guys to understand that in AP World History, what we do is we look for major trends, okay? In Unit 6, we're looking at imperialism. And so what we need to do is we need to figure out how America's story fits into that trend. And it fits in pretty well, all right? Not in a good way. So here in AP World History, we've talked a lot about how bad things are in America. We've talked a lot about slavery, a lot about suppression of rights. And now we're sitting here talking about how America has imperialized much of the world. All right, I don't want you guys to go home and tell your parents that America's the great devil, because it's not. But a lot of this stuff you're going to go into further depth with when you take AP US History next year or Honors US History. But again, I need to emphasize, guys, that this is a world history class. So we need to understand how America fits in with these major trends. So remember, Unit 6 is consequences of imperialism or consequences of industrialization. And part of those consequences are this new American imperialism. And we need to figure out what that means for the rest of the world, okay? And here is what it is. America becomes a global empire. America imperializes other nations for its own benefit. And we need to look at each example of how that happens. So on the next page, I'm going to ask you guys to write or start writing again. So has anyone ever heard of manifest destiny? I'm sure many of you have. All right, in many of your classes that you've ever looked at American history, you probably have encountered this term, manifest destiny. And usually it's presented in this sort of glorious way. All right, America had this ordained right to go from east to west and to take over this land. Okay. But in AP World History, we're going to take this definition, this manifest destiny, and we're going to put it on the same playing field as the civilizing mission, imperialism, okay, social Darwinism. So again, this is not going to be a good term. This is going to be a definition of something that Americans used to justify early imperialism. So I need you guys to understand that manifest destiny is a 19th century idea, okay? It's a doctrine. So American colonists, they used this idea of manifest destiny to justify westward expansion. So from those early 13 colonies, they continued to push the Louisiana Purchase, and then later Mexican Cession, and then later all the way across the continent, okay? Now, it doesn't really seem that harmful. Right? It's this belief that the U.S. Throughout the American continents was both justified and inevitable. But what I need you to understand, guys, is it's a little bit more sinister. It's a little bit more racist, okay? It was complicated because it was the idea that white Protestants had the ordained right by God to spread across this nation. All right, they were meant to take their religion, they were meant to take their civilization, their culture across this continent and civilize it. Okay, so I need you guys to understand that it's not something that, oh yeah, I mean, this land is naturally ours. It's the key thing to remember, guys, is that there are people in this land already. These sort of indigenous peoples, these Native Americans. Manifest destiny is the idea that you can just take their land. All right, this is an ordained destiny of the American people, irregardless of who lives there. Okay, and this is this weird sort of a political cartoon that represents this manifest destiny. Okay, this westward expansion. You can see the railroads taking over these local groups of Native indigenous peoples. So, guys, what is American imperialism? What I need you guys to understand is that, again, we haven't talked that much about America, but America industrializes. We said that America industrializes in that second industrial revolution. Go ahead and walk down downtown Columbus and see the evidence of that second industrial revolution, okay? And once America industrializes, once it becomes a very, very wealthy nation, it's using natural resources, it also realizes that it needs to expand in order to continue to get more natural resources, okay? And one way that it will expand is to use that idea of manifest destiny, okay? The 13 colonies, we can expand westward. Okay? We can take that land west of the Appalachian Mountains, all right? We can take that land all the way out to what we know now as California, because we are God's chosen people, all right? This is going to be a justification for controlling and conquering the indigenous non-white people. All right, so the indigenous people, Native Americans, okay? And one way they're gonna do that is they're gonna do that through the use of superior weapons, okay? Remember, industrialization kind of goes hand in hand with the modernization of the military. So you'll start to see the new guns, all right, new heavy weapons that will be used against these indigenous peoples, all right? And they will begin to push these indigenous people off these traditional lands. So what you're going to start to see is that land that historically belonged to Native American tribes, they were pushed off this land and pushed to these places called reservations, okay? And we'll go a little bit more into what happens on these reservations, but just know that manifest destiny is used as a justification to take this land, okay? Doesn't matter who lives there. So part of this American imperialism also, we can also look at the Mexican-American War. So you're gonna probably spend a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, who knows, on this conflict next year when you go on to Mr. Forgy and Miss Lovin's AP World or AP US History classes. I'm gonna spend 2 minutes talking about it, okay? But the Mexican-American War is quite important in the sense that a huge chunk of our current continental United States is going to come from this conflict. All right, so after Mexico wins independence from Spain, you're going to start to see internal divisions. So I can't really get into the whole nitty-gritty on how Mexico is going to win independence from Spain, but you know, you have the idea. All right, Creoles, upper class, Mexicans will start to revolt against Spain, and eventually they'll have conflicts. Spain will eventually allow Mexico to go. But again, you see these cycles of revolutions continuing onwards and onwards, and Mexico is going to be quite weakened. All right, so here's what's going to happen. Texas, all right, this land that we all know now, is going to receive their own independence from Mexico in this own sort of shady happening. But Texas is going to kind of sort of convince the United States that there's some bad things going on in this land over here. All right, and using some real shady justifications, the United States is going to attack a very weak Mexico. Again, remember, these cycles of revolutions are occurring in these Latin American states. So Mexico is going to be very weak. The United States is going to be very powerful. And after the conflict, all right, after all the things I'm sure you guys know about the Alamo, what will end up happening is that the war will result in a crushing defeat for Mexico. And Mexico will be forced to sign away a third of its territory. All right, a third. Think about that. Mexico is a pretty big country today, but a third of it has to be signed over to the United States after this war, which the United States started. All right. And so now modern day California, New Mexico, parts of Texas, Colorado, Nevada, Utah, and Arizona is going to be part of this United States. Okay. And so you can start to see this manifest destiny happening. You had this land here, these 13 colonies. Slowly, you had the Louisiana Purchase. All right. That was land that was bought from Napoleon during the French Revolution. All right. And now by 1848, America has started to fully spread across the entire continent. And they do it through this idea of manifest destiny, because all this land that they're going to acquire in the Mexican cession, right, there's going to be native indigenous people there. And these people will be pushed off their land. They will be pushed into reservations. Okay. Now, we've also talked about a little bit of American imperialism in other examples. So before the holiday break, we talked about American imperialism in Japan. So I told you guys that in 1854, Commodore Matthew Perry, okay, very important naval commodore, sails into Tokyo, into the port of Yokohama, with big steel guns and very powerful ships, and opens up a very much isolated, feudalistic Japan. And as we said, guys, once America opens up Japan, it's kind of like a Pandora's box, right? You open it up and you force Japan to open up not just to the United States, but to all of these imperial global powers. Now with Japan, they quickly modernize, they overthrow the Tokugawa emperor, they have the Meiji Restoration, and they go through that industrialization process very quickly. Okay, so that's good, but it wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for American imperialism. That's what I need you guys to understand. So there's other examples of the American imperialism. In 1868, the United States will purchase modern-day Alaska from Russia. Now, that doesn't really sound like imperialism if the Americans are buying the land from Russia, but Russia took the land from indigenous peoples in the first place, okay? And then the Secretary of State at the time was a man named William Seward. Seward is going to purchase Alaska for $8 million, which today kind of seems like pennies, but at the time, people were a little angry. Why are we buying this frozen tundra, this garbage from Russia for basically like all this money? We just fought the American Civil War. We were not doing so well. Our economy wasn't doing so well. Now we're going to buy this frozen tundra. But turns out that was a great purchase. We're going to later find oil in Alaska, and it's going to add to that natural resources that countries need in order to continue this industrialization process. Okay. Now, this one's a pretty sketchy story. American imperialism is also going to result in the conquering of Hawaii. So I don't know about you guys, but if you've ever looked at a map and you've looked at the 50 states, and they all kind of look close together. All right, you've got the continental US and you have Alaska, which is kind of up there, but it's still at least sort of connected to the continental US, right, through Canada. Hawaii is kind of weird. It's kind of in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Ever wonder why that's a state? The reason is because Hawaii used to be a monarchy, okay? Hawaii had a queen, actually, and don't ask me to pronounce her name because it is basically impossible. Now she ran the Hawaiian Islands, and Hawaii had an indigenous group of people, Hawaiians, speaking Hawaiian, all right, totally different culture. Now this former monarch, this queen right here, it's harder to see her face, but she is going to allow American planters in, all right? So she allowed families like the Dole family. You guys might recognize that from the pineapples, Dole pineapples. And she allows these American planters to come in and to kind of settle the land and allow them to grow pineapples and make money off the land. But eventually these white American planters decide that they no longer like the Hawaiian monarch. So on the very day that they rebel against the monarch and the Hawaiian government, the US Navy just so happens to show up into Hawaii and to help these planters overthrow the monarch, put her in prison, and essentially Hawaii becomes a American colony after that. So I need you guys to understand that Hawaii seems kind of like this island in the middle of nowhere. What is so special about it besides pineapples? But the Americans wanted it for the natural resources, and later they wanted it for a market. So remember, a lot of these imperialist ventures are global empires taking over a colony in order to extract natural resources, bring the resources back to, England, the United States, France, whatever, finish the goods, and then send it back and make people pay for a higher price. Very similar to mercantilism. So that's really what Americans wanted with Hawaii. Not the tropical paradise that it's become today, but they wanted it to be a market for their finished goods. Okay. So kind of pushing onwards to this more American imperialism. I know you guys thought, okay, surely after Hawaii and Alaska, like that it'd be over with, but you'd be wrong. So, as we said, guys, Spain and Portugal, we haven't really heard much about them recently, and that is because, again, they failed to industrialize. All right, they really failed to modernize their military, and that's going to hurt them pretty bad in 1898 when they go to war with the United States. So, again, this is another conflict that you will discuss in great depth when you get into AP US history or honors American history. So just understand that the United States starts this war. There's questionable motives, or there's questionable beginnings of the war, but it results in a victory. And it is a huge victory because it will force Spain to relinquish its claims on Cuba, okay? So Cuba is going to become, it's not an American colony, but under sort of American protectorate, I guess. And it will also have to cede complete control of Guam, this little tiny island over here, which you may have never heard of. It's going to be important for the Americans in World War II. And Puerto Rico, which may or may not become a U.S. state, and the Philippines. So all of this land is now going to become part of either a colony or a protectorate of the United States. So do you understand that this is because Americans were hoping to, this was part of this American imperialism, okay? So, more American imperialism, guys. As we said, Latin America, like in examples like with Mexico, you see Spain is forced to give Mexico independence. You see it throughout Central America, all right? These small countries like Panama will kind of revolt against the Spanish and receive their own independence. But the United States, American businessmen will come into Panama and they will basically force the Panamanians to allow the canal to be built. So you guys have probably heard of the Panama Canal today. You might have heard that it was originally a French venture, which is true. The French originally wanted to build the Panama Canal, but they were forced to stop building it. So the Americans came in and forced Panama to give over the land to build this canal. Why is the Panama Canal important? Well, Americans historically, or anyone historically, would have to sail all the way around South America, all the way down to basically at South Argentina in order to trade with the Pacific. If you were, trying to trade something from New York to, Japan, you'd have to go all the way around South America in order to sail that way. But now, with the Panama Canal, all you have to do is sail through Panama, which is way above South America, and shorten that trip considerably, right? Very similar to the Suez Canal over in Egypt. The United States is also, even though the United States never really takes over colonies in South and Latin America at large, what the United States will do is they'll engage in something called economic imperialism. So you're going to start to see Americans trying to force Latin American economies to trade with them and buy finished goods. And we're going to talk a lot more about economic imperialism. It is a major theme of probably the coming lectures. So please understand that American imperialism goes hand in hand with this sort of attempt to control what Latin America produces and who they buy from as well. So I need you guys to understand that at the end of period 3, so 1900, America looks a little bit different than how it started, okay? That's sort of how it started, how it's going meme. Guys, in 1750, America's not even a country. In 1900, it owns this huge, vast swath of the world. All right, we started as 13 colonies here in the East Coast. Westward expansion and manifest destiny took us across, all right, the United States, the purchase of Alaska, conquering Hawaii, and then taking all these little tiny islands, all right? Defeating the Spanish in the Spanish-American War resulted in Spain, Cuba. So American imperialism is a critical component, guys, all right? And remember, as I said in the beginning, College Board wants you guys to understand American imperialism in conjunction with Japanese and Russian imperialism. So the United States, what you need to understand is its westward expansion, okay? Japanese, it's not necessarily westward expansion, sort of more southward almost. But as you can see, and you've seen this map before, guys, after Japan modernizes, after the United States Navy forces the Japanese Empire to open up, Japan sort of decides, well, if we can't beat them, we may as well join them. All right, they modernize their military very, very quick. All right, they start to run out of resources in order to keep that industrial revolution going. And so they begin to conquer other places, starting with Korea, well, starting with, Okinawa or these tiny little islands, Formosa, which is modern day Taiwan. All right, later Korea, where they start to bump up against the Russians, okay, which is where we get into that Russia-Japanese war. So you have American expansion is westward, Japanese expansion is sort of southward. Russian expansion is going to be eastward, okay? What you see is that Russia in 1533 is kind of just this land right here. And slowly you start to see the Russian Empire expanding. And just like the Americans and just like the Japanese, they begin to run up into these indigenous peoples in these lands, okay? And instead of, allowing these indigenous peoples to keep their cultures, keep their heritages, keep their language, they engage in a process called Russification, in which the Russian Tsar and the Russian culture essentially forces these indigenous people to become Russians, to adopt the Russian language, to adopt Russian culture, to get rid of their indigenous customs, okay? America's westward, Russia's eastward, Japan is southward, okay? You do need to understand these 3 countries and their expansion. And I think this will help you guys. All right, this is a map that was made by a fellow AP World History teacher. And I think it's a good way to show how over the course of period 3, these 3 new imperial empires expand. All right, as I said to you, in period 2, we talked about England, we talked about France. But we really didn't talk about America. We really didn't talk about Japan. We really didn't talk about Russia. All right. The only thing we said about America and Japan was that they were kind of isolated. All right. They were colonies of other places. But you need to understand that in period 3, these 3 nations achieve independence. All right. Well, America achieves independence, and Russia and Japan opens its borders and expands very quickly, and Russia expands eastward. Okay. And takes all of this land. So please, please, please take a good look at this map, because I think it's really, really helpful to see how these 3 empires expand and how they do it so quickly. All right, these are the main 3 power players in period 3. And keep this in mind, because we will talk about all 3 of these countries in period 4. All right, they will all be major characters when we get to World War I, World War II, and of course the Cold War, okay? So as I said in the beginning, guys, all of the, we keep sitting here talking about how these global empires are expanding and how they're taking over new places. But again, not all of these former global empires, Spain and Portugal, the ones that basically took over these huge swaths of South America and even North America, parts of Africa and Asia in period two, they're trading post empires. Okay. Spain and Portugal lose every one of their colonies in the Americas. Okay, Brazil revolts against Portugal. All these tiny little colonies that were part of Spain will revolt. They'll also go into cycles of revolution, but they will no longer be part of the Spanish Empire. All right, so by the end of period three, Spain and Portugal look exactly how they look today. All right, two small countries that share a peninsula in Europe. Okay, kind of sad, but it is what it is. All right, guys, so that is the end of my lesson. And as usual, if you missed work, please send me an email and I will let you know what you missed. If not, I will see you guys in class. Hope you guys enjoyed this lesson and keep it up, guys. I know this virtual stuff is difficult, but we're getting through it. All right. See you guys later.